Hey everyone, it's Brighton here, and I am with Pastor Jay. He just kicked off our Gospel of Mark series this past Sunday, Are You Ready series. And so the sermon title was, Are You Ready for Shattered Expectations?
Right.
And Pastor Jay, you shared 5 different vignettes in the first 2 chapters of Mark, where Jesus was interacting with different people, and then there were questions that people were asking of Jesus at the end of those vignettes. And one of those was Jesus eating and sitting and having conversation with tax collectors and sinners.
Right.
And the Pharisees asked Jesus in their heart, why does Jesus sit with these people? Why does he have community with the undesirable?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So do you have any more that you'd like to dig into on that one?
It's a pretty striking little narrative there that takes place.
Yeah.
And Jesus is having, he's at this gathering and there's all these people around that are considered the lowest tier of society.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know exactly what specifically the other sinners were about,
right?
But you can kind of imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And we see Jesus spending time with those people in other parts of the Gospels, also in the New Testament. And he actually earns a reputation for himself, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
by spending time with people that other people who consider themselves religious or consider themselves close to God think, he shouldn't be spending time with those people. Those aren't people that I would spend my time around. So why is he doing that? And of course, he answered them and said, look, I'm here to call the sick. It's the sick that need a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
It's the unrighteous that need to meet God and have their lives changed. And if you're righteous already, that's great. But my concern is with, those that are far from God,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to call them and I want to bring them back to God.
Yes.
So it's a very hopeful message, but it's interesting to see. I didn't have time to go into some of the other passages in the New Testament where Jesus is pictured as this friend of sinners. But we know that, in another place where he was talking about John the Baptist, and, he was saying, you all, why'd you go out to see John the Baptist? Apparently some of you had little respect for his ministry and what he was trying to teach you. And he said, just as like me, I came neither eating nor drinking, or John came neither eating nor drinking. And they say, well, he's got issues. And then the Son of Man, Jesus, came eating and drinking with people. And people said he's a glutton, and a drunkard.
Yep.
So these were serious accusations and behind Jesus's back, that serious accusations about his reputation that they were making because of the people that he intentionally was.
And there were laws in place that Jesus was kind of getting close or even breaking the laws that the Pharisees had set in that time.
Right.
So that's very interesting that Jesus really gets at the heart of who God is, obviously.
Right. And I'm fascinated by that because, I think we have a little bit of those tendencies in the church today, and probably, if we're honest, I have some of those too, where, especially after we come to know Christ, we tend to move away from people who might be far from God, when actually it's God's heart that we move toward them and we seek them out and we spend time with them. But, I think research has shown, and stuff from Barna maybe, that once you become a Christian, then 4 or 5 years later, you've left the context that you were normally operating in your circle of friends, and you're only hanging out at that point with church people and people that are Christians. And so we lose our interaction with people who don't know Christ over time after we become Christians. And I don't think that's actually Jesus' heart for where he wants us, because he continually sought out people who were far from God and spent time with them. And they loved that. Somehow he was able to pull that off. We're not very good at that sometimes. Or people sense our judgment and that pushes them away. But Jesus had that perfect balance of seeking after people who were far away from God, but making them feel welcome and like he was interested in them, and that they knew he had something to offer them too. So
absolutely. Well, I think that's a good kind of segue to the next part that we wanted to talk about. So at the end of your message, you unfortunately did not have enough time at the end to play a video that you wanted to share with the congregation. So do you want to kind of share a little bit about that video?
I'm sure people are probably glad that I didn't take the time to actually tack it on to the end. there's always more that can be said, right, with any message.
Yeah,
but
that's what we're here for.
So those people that watch the Super Bowl,
yes,
whatever reason whether they're watching it for the football or for the romance story, or just for the commercials. Some people like to check out the commercials and how good are they? How funny are they? I didn't think it was a great crop of commercials this year, actually. But there was a commercial in there by this group that for a couple of years has funded some commercials about Jesus under this "He Gets Us" tagline. Trying to make Jesus relatable to the everyday person, maybe stir a little bit of curiosity in them, and as to what made him tick and what does he have to say to the everyday world, to us today. So, but it turned out to be a controversial commercial. They showed two of them, but everybody remembers the first one. I'm not sure anybody remembers what the second one even was.
The second one was there, but what is it?
Right, I couldn't tell you. But the first one, for those who didn't see it, it was a commercial where Jesus was people were washing the feet of other people in these contexts where you would normally expect there to be a lot of conflict.
Yes.
And these were depicted by some AI-generated diagrams, photos, which is also sort of an interesting aspect of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I appreciated about the commercial that they're trying to highlight Jesus, and they're using a current, media format that the church really hasn't thought a whole lot about. How do we really engage digitally?
Yes.
How do we do the kinds of promotion for Jesus and the gospel? I mean, you don't want it to be like slick advertising, but like these are the kinds of media that people interact with.
Yeah.
And so how does the church use those things to highlight who Jesus is in the gospel? So I appreciate that this group is trying to take those opportunities to do that.
Yeah.
But as you know, you saw it, right?
Yes,
and
I
you
did.
saw the end. It verged into the controversial a little bit.
Yes.
But it was dealing with this idea that Christians are called, just as Jesus did, as we saw in the first couple chapters of Mark.
Yeah.
That they're called to go to people that are not like them, that maybe they would have serious disagreements with, and in some sense by depicting foot washing, to represent Jesus differently and to shatter people's expectations about that, to serve the world. And the foot washing was kind of a metaphor for that. But as you know, it generated quite a bit of controversy.
Yeah, absolutely. and like one of the things is that our culture outside of the church doesn't really understand what foot washing means. So like to see that on their TV screens, you're kind of like, wait, what's happening here? Like what are they doing? What's the meaning? And then when it gets to the end of the tagline, and like Jesus didn't come to spread hate, but he came to wash feet. That's kind of where we get into that controversial part.
Exactly.
But then it helps us reflect. I think what you're getting at is that for us as followers of Christ, it kind of awakens us and says, what were the examples that Jesus showed us? And how do we do that in a modern time? Like as we are living today, like how can we wash feet to those undesirable, to those that are at the bottom or feel far away from God?
Right, exactly. And that's why I wanted to use it in the message, was because it definitely got at that idea of approaching the world and how can we show them a different face of Jesus.
Yeah.
Personally, where I thought it dipped into the controversial was right at the end when it had that tagline about Jesus didn't preach hate.
Yeah.
And that being a culturally loaded term.
Yes.
That is usually applied to people, to Christians, or any people who believe that there is a transcendent morality or something that God desires for us and that we need to pursue those things. And then over and against people who would say like, oh, kind of anything goes, anything's acceptable. And if you don't agree with that, then you're hating.
Right.
So that's where, it tipped into for me, like what message is really sending here? Because we do believe that people, as Jesus taught, like people need to repent.
Yes.
They need to come back to God. Jesus never condoned sin.
Correct.
He never affirmed it.
Yes.
But what I liked about the first part, and it got people to think about, he did reach out toward those who we would think, God wouldn't want them. They would never be interested in God. They're undesirable to God. And yet those were the people that Jesus did approach and show love to. So for me, it was a mixed bag, but I think it's worth talking about. And that's why we bring it up here.
Right.
Those are the kinds of things as believers we need to be wrestling with and thinking about and discussing and really challenging ourselves. Like, what is Jesus asking me to do? What's he asking our church to do and to be in this cultural context? So in that way, it was a very useful commercial.
Yes.
And I'm glad that so many people are talking about it.
It has definitely created conversation within the church, outside of the church, people having different perspectives based off of what their previous thoughts about the church or who Jesus is. But yeah, like you're saying, how can we love and have relationship with people, but also knowing that loving them doesn't equal affirming their sin. We are all sinful.
Right.
We all have sin. So we can love one another without saying, hey, your lifestyle as it is 100% okay with God.
Right.
I just don't, that's not biblical. That is not biblical. That's not what Jesus shared in his examples with us.
Exactly. So if you haven't seen it, look it up. You can find it real easily.
Yep.
He Gets Us is like, it might even be hegetsus.org. I'm not sure,
Mm-hmm.
but you can find it on YouTube real easily and see what you think of that. Wrestle with that. Talk to some people about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And their website, has a lot. Like when I went on there, I was just kind of doing a quick skim. They have 3 different Bible reading plans on YouVersion that goes into the scriptures of Jesus and his ministry and what he calls his believers to do.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of great resource there on their website as well. So, all right, that was a quick but kind of in-depth.
There's a lot to think about.
A lot to think about, and I'm sure there's always more to talk about. But for the sake of time, going to kind of
we'll talk about more as we go through the Mark series.
Oh yeah,
towards
sure.
Easter.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
we look forward to having you join us for that.
Yep, absolutely. So Pastor Adam is giving the second message here in the Gospel of Mark. So, are you ready?
Are you ready?
Are you ready?
That is the
All
question.
right. Have a great rest of your week, and we will see you again next week.